Okay, I think we're going to get going. Thank you all for being here. This is a collaboration between our Racial Justice Committee and our case managers group, and that's why I think we've got such a great turnout. I love it when we can collaborate. This is going to be a really great training, so thank you all for being here. I want to welcome Shore Denny. She is going to be our presenter. Shore is the founder and CEO of Community Now, which is a nonprofit organization that offers programs and trainings that focus on providing evidence-based theories to equip individuals with the coping skills needed to manage the stressors of life, to become socially and emotionally resilient. So check out her website if you want. I think, Shore, if you want to put that in the chat, that would be great. Shore's also a really active member of our racial justice group, and she has done presentations on the history of racism for us. So once our website's up, if you want to go look, it's all on our website, and that was a really fantastic, I think it was a two-parter. She did a two-part history of racism that was really great. So take it away, Shore.
Good morning, you guys. I'm really excited and glad that you're here. Understanding generational poverty is something that I have been talking with different people about and thought that it was something that maybe we needed to focus on. So in doing this presentation, I wanted to make sure that it's going to be very interactive. So what I'm hoping for is I'm going to have activity slides that come up. And please at that time, feel free to answer the questions, do your comments. We do need to keep them short because we do have a lot of information, but I do want to make sure that we are all included, that your thoughts are heard, and that you have a great understanding of the information that I am going to be giving to you today. What I want you to know that this is a safe space, so please speak, be respectful, and let's just jump into this. So my first question, do you guys know why slavery began? And what was the first crop? So if you guys could throw out there in the comments, or if you can, Marilyn, if you might want to answer that. Why did slavery begin, you guys? Come on, wake up. Anybody know?
Oh, I want to say money.
Yep, money. Money's a good answer. No answer is wrong, you guys. No answer is wrong. I'm just wanting to hear your thoughts and get you involved. So money. And do you know what the first crop was?
Cotton, tobacco.
Somebody said slavery was about economics.
Okay. And the first crop?
Was it tobacco?
Sugar? Tobacco. Good answer. Sugar is a good answer. Okay, let's move on. Thank you. Sugar is the answer. Sugar is the reason slavery started. And really, first, right now, I want you to just think of your personal relationship with sugar. What would you do if people wanted to take sugar away? Like, I think about having a no sugar diet, but today we really can't because sugar is in everything that we eat. So think about that. Sugar was in high demand. And I show this slide because Queen Elizabeth was one of the people that actually prompted demand, right? Because she loved sugar so much that she did everything with sugar. If you read the story of her and sugar, she bathed in sugar, she brushed her teeth with sugar, she washed her face with, because they felt that sugar was a miracle drug back at that time, just like they did, different things like Coke and different things in history. So sugar is the answer. And again, think of your personal relationship with sugar. Now, how did this all start? 800 BC is when they started cultivating sugar, but they couldn't figure out the right mix, right? So they were looking for the best worker and the best climate. So they started in Europe trying to cultivate sugar, and they found that the climate was too cold and they needed to get a hotter climate. So they had used Russian slaves and European slaves to do the labor of sugar up until they moved to the Mediterranean. And what they found was warmer weather was good for sugar, but the European slaves that they were using didn't do well in the weather. But what they found out was that if they went to warmer climate and they had a worker that could actually tolerate the heat, that they could create a great market in sugar. So that is actually how the African became the laborer for sugar. They started with the indigenous peoples of the lands that were warm. And we see in throughout history all the time that the indigenous people actually fought back. They said, no, we're not going to do it. And throughout all of the different countries that they tried to enslave the indigenous people, they did mass suicides. They killed their children. They refused to be a part of this system. And that's where, again, the African worker came into play. So now let's talk about the transatlantic slave system that we know of today, or chattel slavery. It started with the Portuguese. The Portuguese started the slavery system in 1444, again for sugar. They found that Brazil had a perfect temperament, perfect climate for producing sugar. But again, the natives of Brazil refused to do the work. Well, Africa is right across the water. So they found that they could get already enslaved Africans. They could buy them and bring them over to do the work. And they found in Brazil, I went there for a trip, and this picture to the left of you is a picture you see. They understand and believe that their whole economy was built on the back of the slave. So the whole economy is on that picture. That comes from Africa town in Brazil. I'm getting ready to come to a moment, but did y'all know that slavery was global? I did not. I thought that, I don't know really what I thought because I hadn't actually put it together, but there was a transatlantic slave system, a triangle. And that transatlantic system, what I want to show you with this picture here is, look at how the triangle went. So in North America, we had sugar, tobacco, and cotton that we were cultivating. That raw material was sent to Europe. Europe manufactured it and created it into clothes, cigarettes, things like that, and shipped it to Africa to buy slaves. And then the slaves were shipped to America to create or to plant sugar, tobacco, and cotton. So the slave generated its own system by creating or planting the cotton and the sugar and stuff, and then having it being sold to gain more slaves. They perpetuated their own enslavement. I thought that was quite interesting. Most people said they thought that it was cotton, and it really is a cotton industry because the cotton purchased more slaves. So here's a moment I'd like to ask you guys these 3 questions. Please feel free to come off mute, answer 1 or 2. We've got to keep it kind of short, but I want you to understand, what is the mindset? What was going on during these times? So did you know that sugar had such an impact on the world's trading system? Number 1, did you? You can throw those in the chat, or you can come up with an answer. Did you know that slavery was global? And what impact did this have on the enslaved Africans' opportunity to make money? So can I get anyone to come off and answer any one of these?
I find it very interesting. I very quickly, my father was born in Georgia in 1918. And this was a conversation in my house all of my life. And no, I had no idea that this was going on. I had no idea this part of it was not discussed. He discussed a lot from Georgia. He discussed a lot from 1918. He discussed a lot from World War II. But these particular facts, had no idea, no.
Thank you. And what do you think? What do you think the impact is of the enslaved Africans and their opportunity to make money during this time? I mean, it's you know, it's a rhetorical question. We know that. What do you think? I want your mind to start thinking on that. Wow, how was the enslaved person able to make money? Were they thinking of money?
I don't think they would have been thinking about money. I think they would have been thinking about going back home.
Exactly, right? To a system they understood, because they had an economic system, right? It's not like they they were, void of knowledge, but they didn't know this system, right? They didn't know this economic system. Thank you. We're going to move on. So thousands of European immigrants come to the New World for financial gain, right? And I always wondered why. Why did all those people come? So I want you to know that it was the 30-Year War, which was a devastating war in Europe, and it was called a religious war. And it, in fact, changed the structure of Europe to what it is now. And during the 30-Year War, it was a scorched earth war. So there were many migrants, there were many there was poverty, there was famine, there was, it was a horrible place to be at that time. So there were many, many poor peasants that were trying to find a better life, right? Trying to live in a better place. And they kind of sold themselves for 7 years into a servitude. But at the end of that 7 years, they would get land and they would get money, right? So that's the indentureship that we know of. And with that indentureship, I have to come and step in and start talking about our hierarchy here in America versus that of Europe. So if you look at the creation of the caste system started in about 1500s, when slavery started, when sugar production started, and the concept of, whoa, we need a worker, we need a large workforce for this money, right? Because money is getting ready to be made in huge amounts for all of those crops. And so right here at the 1500s, you had all of these people from Europe coming over with different cultures, with different attitudes, and they had to kind of meld together into America and the American idea. And that was the caste system. So to explain that better, look at this diagram. On the left-hand side is traditional England setup, right? This is how their hierarchy was set up. And look on the right-hand side, and I did not take the diagram apart, but for Europe, they had a king, then they had the lords, right? And then they had the knights, and then they had the peasants. The peasant class could hardly ever make it above the peasant class, right? They were peasants in a fief system. They could not move up, basically. Now think about us in America. What the landowners did when they came here was they took the king off, which means that at the top of our hierarchy are the landowners and the corporations. Under them, they created what is called a class of white. And those indentured servants that came over, they were basically promised that they would never be on the bottom again, that they would be middle. They would be in the middle, and there would be a servant class under them. I'll explain it more as we go. So when we talk about who created slavery, I want you to know it was the landowner. All of the landowners that had land at the time of the 1400s, the 1500s, the 1600s here in the New World and in England, they came and they created what we want to call our slavery system today, because they were the only ones that could vote. They were the only ones that created the laws, and they owned the slaves. So I think you might see where I'm going here. The landowners were the ones creating the laws. They were the ones that owned the slaves. So I think you would want to guess that the laws were created so that slavery would be in place and so that the landowners would make the money, right? So I've skipped a big section here, which is going to be when African Americans became slaves, right, in the 1600s. But what I want to show you here is these are individual laws that were created during that time by the landowners. And I want you to see how they limited, they restricted one by one the rights of the Black or the African American person. There were always free Blacks in America, but most of them were enslaved. So I want you to see how how racism began. I talked to you about the caste system and how they started like saying, oh, brown people, they are thugs. They aren't really cool. We don't really want to deal with them. But look at these laws. You will see that over and over again, they're creating laws to stop interracial marriage, which means that interracial marriage was happening. So they had to create racism within our system so that they could make the money financially. If you keep looking down this list, you'll see that in 1790, the United States Congress declared this nation white, that this was a white nation. which means that it was not set up for any others. And that those below, again, in that caste system, that the class of Black, the enslaved Africans, would always be on the bottom. Keep that mind frame, keep that mindset. And now let's discuss the financial impact of slavery. So can someone talk about the benefit to the landowner? Is there a benefit to the landowner for slavery? And we're talking about the period 1619 to 1864. So was there a value to life, and what was that value? And was there an opportunity for enslaved people during this time? And my last question that I'm hoping some of you guys will come on is, was there opportunity, and what was that opportunity for the white class? Can someone come off? You guys want to talk about the benefit of the landowner?
So I guess the benefit to the landowner would be almost free labor, because he did need to supply some food and some energy for the labor, right? Like folks couldn't work without a roof over their head or some nutrition in their tummy. The value of life was only, I think, as much as the labor the person could put out. So if, it's like a worn down horse, if the worn down horse can't pull the cart anymore, why keep him around? The opportunity for the enslaved people, I guess there was, depending on who was your landowner, if you could, eventually work your way out, work your way up, and become a no longer enslaved person. But as long as you're enslaved, you're dependent on your landowner to make you're not your own person anymore. You're not your own human being. And the opportunity for the white class would just be free labor, more money. The opportunity for the white class is always the more money.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Someone have a different idea?
I would want to agree with what she just said. I also think the benefit to the landowner is that they could increase their wealth by increasing the amount of land that they owned.
Right, that's true. That's true. Right. And when we think about the time of then the value of life, I really am questioning if there was any. Even the landowners, if they lost their land, there was no value. I think value was only in money. I'm not sure if there was a value in life at this time, or maybe even today.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something about that value of life. Landowners were not foolish people. These are people who had an understanding of the free labor that they were receiving. I think that I think it's likely that in order to prevent having to buy more slaves, I think there was some level of care provided to those slaves, meals, rest time. Anybody who's going to work doing physical labor is going to need some level of care in order to maintain that labor force. Slaves were probably not cheap. I mean, relative to the economy, it's hard to say. I can't make a guess at that, but I suspect, I would like to think that landowners had at least some respect for their own wallets, in caring for their property.
That very good, Jim. Yes, and at some point they did, but in the beginning they didn't. And you will go through this training, and thank you for that point, that you would think that they would take care of their property, but they did at a point begin to take care of the enslaved people that they had, because they saw that they were so profitable. So you're right. Now we're going to step into the Reconstruction period, which is right after slavery, 1865. Are there any more comments before we step to another phase in time? Okay.
Sure, we can't hear that.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Hold on one second. I apologize, you guys. We will start that over.
Reconstruction.
Are you here?
This period in American history is called Reconstruction period. The word conjures up the image of physical rebuilding, the rebuilding of the South after the Civil War. But this period that
What is going on? I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sure what's happening here. What just happened? That's really weird, you guys. I have to say, I've not seen that happen before.
Always keeping you on your toes.
I say that's why
began
we might not be able to.
Whether you have a thesis, capstone, a research paper to write this year, Grammarly is a must-have for all students. You can get 50% off of all Grammarly Pro plans now. Since a thesis is a
I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep saying that until I get this. I'm not gonna say it again. Hold on. Now we're here with this.
and the end of the Civil War was not so much about the physical rebuilding, but of the attempt to politically rebuild the South. With the end of the Civil War, the question was what to do with the southern states. President Lincoln had hoped to be generous and allow the easy reintegration of the southern states into the Union. However, his assassination changed everything. The new president, President Johnson, was actually a governor from a southern state. However, the Republicans in Congress did not trust him. And the Southerners who took control of the southern states immediately after the Civil War didn't help their own matters. They passed a series of what's called black codes. These black codes limited the freedom, the ability of freed slaves to take any job other than jobs as field hands. In other words, to return to the things they were doing as slaves, except this time being paid small sums of money. Immediately in the North, there was an outcry. Why did they fight the Civil War? What were all the deaths for? If the Southern slaves would once again be almost slaves again. The result? The Reconstruction Act. That Reconstruction Act, which passed despite the objections of President Johnson, called for federal troops to impose rules in the South and to grant the former slaves the rights to vote, the rights to hold land, all of the rights given to other citizens. For the next 13 years, the Reconstruction administration, led by the military, controlled most of the South. Yes, the southern states were independent. They elected new representatives, rejoined the Union, and in many cases there were southern African-American senators, congressmen, and even governors. Until the election of 1876, after which President Hayes, in order to secure the requisite number of votes in the Electoral College, after losing the popular vote, agreed to remove Union troops, or federal troops at that point, from the South. Reconstruction was the norm. But once the troops were removed, Southerners once again began blocking African Americans from holding jobs, traveling on public transportation, and certainly holding office. That was the period of Reconstruction, an attempt that did not return until the 1960s of fully integrating the former slaves into the Southern economy, into the Southern political sphere. Of course, this period, even though it's called the Reconstruction, was also a different period in the United States history. It was the period of invention. It was the period the Transcontinental Railroad was connected, and therefore linking the East Coast and the West Coast. It was the period that the telephone was invented, therefore creating a whole new way of communicating. Those two events, plus many smaller technological events during this period, set the stage for the next period of American history, what we call the industrialization period.
So, for 13 years, there was Reconstruction, and this was a time of opportunity. It was also a time when the KKK was founded, and there was a lot of strife that was going on. Let's discuss the conditioned mindset of an enslaved person. So now I want to take it, and if you can think about the mindset of an enslaved person between 1619 and 1808. Now, between 1619 and 1808, new enslaved people were always coming in to America, right? We would see new, frightened, freaked out people coming that didn't speak our language coming in. So I want to think about what do you think the mindset was of those that were already here and those that were still coming in up until 1808 into a established system, and then the mindset of an enslaved person from 1808 till 1865. No more new people were coming in. It's more of a settled lifestyle. So what do you think would be the mindset of this person? I don't know if I can do the scared and hopeless. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say that top group definitely fear of all of the unknowns.
And the horror that they've already gone through, right? So you
Getting to where they're at, and then they get to another place of horror, and they don't speak the language, and people are beating them and shoving them to do this and making them do that. So they have to maintain their sanity and adapt.
And think of the enslaved person that's already there. So they are freaked out going to someone that's already basically, I guess you could say, conditioned, right? So do you think that the established enslaved people would be going, calm down, Fred, you get ready to get us in trouble? Do you think that there would be some peer pressure to force these new enslaved people to conform?
There was definitely socialization. And
Absolutely.
my guess is that some of those people um, still spoke the home language, the people that were already here. And so I suspect that there was some ability to communicate. And there was absolutely socialization that occurs. I mean, that's human nature. It continues today.
Right. Did someone else want to say something? I think I heard.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for the point you made or kind of the questions you're asking, because this is not something I've ever really, had to think about whether, people versus, people who just got here who are being trafficked into, labor bondage versus people who have been here for a generation or two. And now you're kind of internalizing that oppression, and the people that are used to this are now oppressing their peers. That becomes a bit more insidious than just the oppressor class oppressing you. Now you have it coming from your peers. So just
Yes.
thank you for thank you for the food for thought.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Exactly what I'm trying to do is. So then when you think of a mindset of somebody between 1808 and 1865, well, say I was captured and I came in 1810. I've been here 55 years. I'm conditioned. I'm assimilated. I'm what but what do you think they're thinking of? Do you think that they're looking for financial gain? What do you think the people that have been here from 1808 to 1865, what do you think they're thinking? Or what kind of a lifestyle, or what, just what?
So sure, I have a comment, Daniela here. Hi, everyone. Um, so back to your first question, a thought that I had was you start to believe how you're being treated. So I think that for I mean this is just a thought, you know, I'm not saying that it's true, but I would think that if you're being kind of like to your word of conditioned, if you're being treated a certain way, then I'm at a certain point I must believe that I am, you know, I am a slave, or that's the way I'm supposed to be treated. And then also because of what's being modeled, then they start to act out, and you were sharing that as well, like it becomes a lifestyle, and then they're you know, with their peers. I'm assuming that there was probably violence within their own communities, you know, because of what's being modeled to them. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you. Anyone else have a comment before I move on? Awesome. Let me see. Condition, yes, but doubt assimilation. I would think that they just wanted to take care of what they had: family, food, room. No hope, but had to be conditioned to endure the misery. Yeah, yeah, those are good points, definitely. So I was reading some stuff on Douglas, and then it really surprised me when I found that when he was talking about when the slaves were freed, because you know he was a slave and he became free, he said there were different mindsets, and he said that there were some slaves that were ready to leave, they were ready to walk off the reservation. And I would think maybe those would be like the carpenters, the blacksmiths, right? Maybe people that understood trade and knew that they had a craft, maybe. And then he said that there were those that were unsure but ready for change. And maybe that mindset would be the house cleaner, right? That knew that, well, maybe I could do laundry, or maybe there's some type of work for me. That there were some that did not want to go. They were not ready, and they did not want to leave the plantation. And that shocked me, that there were some that didn't want to go. I thought that was quite interesting, that there were those different mindsets. In this little segment, I'm just going to be throwing a few things like, oh, we got a comment on that. Let's see. Security of what they had. Exactly. Exactly. So there's always been this talk about 40 acres and a mule, and I wanted to throw that out because it has to do with economy. So I always was told that, yeah, we were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule, and then they didn't give it to us, and that would have really helped us. But I want to just start off by saying that mules do not multiply. So even if we'd have gotten 40 acres and a mule, we would have been very limited in our success, because if we were not able to afford a horse to reproduce with that mule, we were dead in the water. You'd get one, so many crops out, but the mule, your neighbor and your mule would not multiply, so it was still keeping them down financially. But that's not what happened. Actually, General Sherman did give land to the freed slaves. When they came through and saw all the plantation land that was now government land, because the states were no longer a part of the Union, they said that he gave land. He gave 40 acre parcels to the enslaved people that he saw around him. And he said there was so much land, why not? But there was one particular time where these freed people said, hey, we don't have anything to work the land with. So General Sherman actually gave them mules to work the land. And that's where the 40 acres and a mule came from. It actually happened. But once Lincoln came back, once Johnson brought the Union back together, they gave the Confederates back their land. And so the 40 acres and a mule did not happen. I want to really focus right here on Black codes. The Black codes happened right after slavery, and the Black codes limited the rights of the newly freed people to keep the white class in power. And it forced many Blacks and whites, but it forced many Blacks to become sharecroppers or to stay connected to their past slave owner. And I bring this up because one other thing that really was developed in 1865 was our prison system. And our prison system, since the 1800s, the Black Code said that if you, let me see, the Black Code said that they restricted the rights of a person to where you walked. They literally had vagrancy laws that said that if you were standing around, you were put in jail. And when they were put in jail, the Blacks were put in jail for longer, and they did harder punishments than their white counterparts. So when we're talking about the new slave system of the prisons, when you are put in prison, or when they were put in prison, it was because they didn't agree with their boss, right? They didn't have a contract with their ex-slave owner, and they were walking down the street to go get a job. The police saw them and said, hey, you're a vagrant, took them to jail. And as you can read here, many of them worked so hard that they died, right? They died in prisons doing the labor. Now, I have this Prop 6 on here because today we are still discussing this. And on your ballot, you will see that Prop 6 is saying that we do not want to allow the corporations to benefit off of the work of the prisoner anymore. And I'm going to leave that to your conscience, but I want you to understand that this goes way back to the 1800s, where they were able to get free labor and treat the inmates as slaves, as the work that they were doing before. So it's still happening today, free to almost free labor in all our prison systems. Look at Prop 6, you guys, if you're local, and look at your ballots. So let's discuss how you would build wealth under these circumstances. So the Black codes are out, right? You really can only work for your old slave owner who was disenfranchised, is now back in power. I can imagine that they were mean, right? And that maybe you couldn't get paid a lot, but so you had to be forced to be cheap labor. Any ideas? I see some stuff in the chat. Anyone want to talk? This is that the slaves did not want to leave. They knew of nothing else. Exactly. They knew of nothing else. Labor continues to be a legal slavery, to be legal slavery in a prison labor. Yes, that's exactly right. Anyone want to say anything? How would you build wealth? What would you do if you were them?
So that's when you start having entrepreneurship, I guess, as a freed slave. And so you may have a little bit of land in that mule, but you take those crops and you go and you sell those crops. So the beginning of entrepreneurship within the Black community, slave community, seamstresses,
all of that. Yes,
all of it.
ma'am. Yes,
I would think laying low, using natural resources as much as possible, and then come up with your own type of business. But I would think lay low would be number one important, because you're always in the sight. Like pretty much whatever you say and do could be used against you in a malicious way. So if you just lay low, use what you got to get what you need in the way that you would like to use those resources. I don't know. I just think lay low to avoid the whole entire jail system.
Right. Like, don't see me, right? Yeah, because there horrible things were happening. Exactly. And
be obedient. You know, whatever the rules are at the time, just make sure you're aware of what they are, be obedient, and just stay low.
Or you could be beaten, killed, put in jail. Yeah. And think of what you just said, and think of what we're telling people today, you know, what you might see and what people are doing today, because these systems are still in place. So Now we're at the Depression. So through the Depression, just these great slogans go out, like Trump's slogan, right? Herbert Hoover had a slogan, and it was American jobs for real Americans. And during the Depression, because jobs were so scarce, what our government did was Herbert Hoover fired all minorities out of all of the major industries, the U.S. Steel, Southern Pacific Railroad, mainly Hispanic people, because Blacks really did not have these opportunities. But all minorities were fired so that the jobs could be given to the class of white. And the Herbert Hoover actually did kickbacks and reimbursements to those organizations for the firing of the people, again, to keep the class of white in the middle as middle class. We all know about lands, the covenants, and that the land that African Americans and Blacks lived on had lower value than the land of the Caucasians. And again, these are all ways of building wealth. So that's why I'm talking about them, right? So there were many opportunities that the African American just did not have, even during the Depression.
Do you know what's really fun? Making a website
Here
on
we
Wix.
go, guys.
West Oakland, California is a predominantly African-American neighborhood. This is the home movie footage of one resident, Ernest Bean. The Beans are unusual for the time, a family moving up to the middle class. Ernest is fortunate. He has a steady job. During the Depression, unemployment for Blacks is at 50%, twice the rate of whites. Jim Crow laws mean segregation is still widespread. Even the New Deal discriminates against African Americans. Whites get the pick of the jobs and a higher wage. One place Black men are welcome to work is on the Pullman sleeper trains. Each luxury car is staffed by uniformed porters. The majority are African American. Ernest Bean is one of these porters. His job provides a stable income through the Depression, but it comes at a price. Black journalist Thomas Fleming observed, "A porter had the best job in his community and the worst on the train."
So, as I think it was Karen said, a lot of people went and tried to get their, do their own job. They tried to get work. They created industry. They did what they needed to try to succeed. But the white mobs, and they keep going. Because when there was Black industry and when Blacks were doing well, there seemed to always be some Caucasian people that were not actually happy about it. And there were many massacres and riots because of employment, because of Blacks excelling.
Personally, I'd go with Sparkle. It cleans everyday messes and it won't clean out your wallet.
The Atlanta race riot occurred September 22nd through 24th in 1906. There was a lot of tension in the air amongst whites and Blacks. There were several causes of the race riot. There was job competition for the first time between whites and Blacks, and this frustrated a lot of whites. People like Alonzo Herndon would frustrate whites because there became this kind of a social elite class of Blacks who were doing well, better than some of the whites.
Alonzo Herndon was an incredibly inventive and successful entrepreneur who was born into slavery, learned the trade of barbering, and came to Atlanta and established a barber shop. And it was a barber shop that had African American barbers who cut hair for white men. And so he was able to establish a very successful business. There was a way of suppressing Black participation in political life, relegating African Americans to a second-class status. And part of making that happen was for white people to vilify African Americans.
During political campaigns, a lot of candidates believe if they were more racist than the other candidate, they would get more white votes. And so you had a lot of just racial rhetoric. A couple of the newspapers printed stories that were untrue about Black men assaulting white women.
There was a guy running for governor named Hoke Smith, and Hoke Smith played off the white fears. In his speeches, he talked about the newspaper articles, the crimes against white women being committed by Blacks, and he said that Black disenfranchisement was necessary to, quote, put Blacks or keep Blacks in their place. And so he added fuel to the fire.
So with all this climate, on September 22nd, 1906, white mobs began to assemble downtown.
They took to the streets and they just began attacking Blacks. They began pulling them off the trolley cars, they began choking them, smothering them.
They began attacking African American businesses like Alonzo Herndon's barbershop, and a number of African Americans were killed as well as wounded by the mobs. The governor didn't immediately call out the state militia, but eventually it was clear that the Atlanta City Police could not disperse the mob, and so the militia was called out, but violence continued for several days, and the response of the African American community was to defend themselves.
And Black people began to fight back. When this occurred, there were some white bodies who fell.
There were dozens of Blacks killed, hundreds were injured. Tremendous property damage was done.
The business leaders quickly got together because it was one thing to have the suppression of African Americans, but it was another thing to have riots that was bad for business.
The white leaders of Atlanta were also concerned about how Atlanta was viewed around the world.
I just don't understand.
Press began to talk about how racist Atlanta was. And so the white civic leaders reached out to Black elites, and they worked out a compromise to quell the violence. And there were Black businesses that operated downtown. And so it was agreement that that would be segregated, and what came to be known as Sweet Auburn was created as a central Black business district. Black people were no longer operating all throughout downtown any longer. So segregation was reinforced. Black people were blamed for the causes of the riot, but there was agreement that they wouldn't allow the mob to continue to attack Black communities any longer.
The white leaders were intent on further suppressing African American rights, and so the African American participants in this process were looking for safety, but in the long run they were not successful in maintaining the voting rights that they had before the riot took place. And the response was further disfranchisement of African Americans to make sure that they didn't have any effect on voting. And so in the legislative session that followed in 1907, the state passed a disfranchisement law that reduced the Black electorate from 25% of African Americans voting to 4%. And that held true then for most of the first half of the 20th century.
So many Black people started working, right? They created jobs, they did industry, but there seemed to be in the environment, in our social environment, an ability, an awareness that Caucasian people could take it. There was one person that said to lay low, don't be seen. But we're talking hundreds of years of where we could be making financial advancement, but each time we did, there was something that came to try to take that advancement from us. And we know,
Atlanta race riot occurred in September.
January 6th of 2020, we saw another white mob. And that white mob was angry and upset about some things, and they actually attacked our Capitol and our police. So it's not like this is still in the past. These are still things that continue to happen. So I'm going to add this war. I know y'all know about the war on drugs and in 1980s that the CIA actually planted and helped cultivate the crack industry in LA and in well, definitely in San Francisco. So the CIA helped the Nicaraguan war. They funded the war by trafficking crack through our Black neighborhoods. There was a whole article on it. It's written and testified in court. So our government has once again gone into our environments, our neighborhoods, and actually tried to benefit off of it by destroying our communities. Now let's get into what is generational poverty. What would your financial mindset be living in these times? We know that if you're successful, it could be taken from you. You know that the government is doing things to suppress you in other ways. A lot of times when we hear people talk about these things, we're like, oh my gosh, that's a conspiracy theory. You know, government is not doing all of that. But right now we've seen through hundreds of years how our government has set itself up so that it is, number one, supporting the class of white, but also suppressing others. So right here, I want to know, what would your financial mindset be living in these times? And how would you gain wealth?
Well, I think one of the big things is that gaining wealth in the way that white people understand it or our society understands it, versus, everyday survival seem to be two different things. So if I make something out of me and I have money, and I'm afraid that somebody's gonna take it from me, do I want to show it to everyone? Do I want to present, hey, I'm actually doing good for myself? Or, like, how do you preserve your livelihood when you know the moment somebody knows that you are doing well, he's gonna come and take it? So that is like a mind-boggling thing, like, can you show that you've made $150,000 a year, and you put a Mercedes in your driveway? Like, what does this mean? Like, it's such a complex question. Like we really need to disseminate, what does it mean to accumulate wealth when you're coming from this kind of background? Is wealth just that you have a secure roof over your head where you don't have to fear? It's not having to fear wealth at that point, like, are we just talking finance? So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like, I could talk about this all day. So those are my jumbled thoughts for you.
Thank you. Someone says, how could people gain wealth? Like, is it even possible? I probably wouldn't gain much wealth. I'd play it as safe as possible to stay out of trouble due to constantly having to live in fear. I wouldn't feel very secure. Right. I don't think that many people wanted wealth. They just wanted a good life and security. That's right. That's
The
right.
mistrust of the financial institutions. You always hear stories of people putting money in their mattresses back in those days because they were making that wealth, but they were keeping that wealth hidden within their family or
Right. Definitely distrust of financial systems. You're right.
I feel like to a degree with fear, there's also hope. And then once you learn the restrictions and let's say you abide by them at the time, obviously violence could come from, let's say, your landowner or whoever, the white man or white person. I feel like with the restrictions and being aware of the restrictions and the potential violence, I feel like networking would come into play, especially in the later years of slavery, once everybody else, everybody else that has been slaves had the ability to communicate with one another. I feel like they would be like, oh, this is a good white man, or this is a good white family. And then once you realize that, I feel like you can network in a way, safely,
when you know that maybe the white man's more protective over the other white man of Black people or slaves. But I just feel like learning what you're how you're suppressed and the ways to navigate through it and find the kind white man, you would go that route. I'm so sorry. This is so choppy. It sounded so much better in my head, but every time I I volunteer, I'm like, oh, let me go on mute. But
No, that's correct.
yeah, one of your questions earlier, where it was like, what do you think the mindset of the slave would have been when they were taken from their home initially? Just taking into consideration the language barrier and knowing that these slaves are not returned. And if, let's say, the slave owner, the landowner, is unhappy with their slave, more than likely it would go into abuse, death if it didn't work out. So there wouldn't be any type of communication whatsoever to let you know what you're about to get into. And then the fear leads you into complying. And, obviously when you see or feel the first abuse, you're not going to want to experience that ever again. And then if
Right.
you do go against the power, then your life's going to be even more miserable. And even when there is power within the numbers, within the slaves, no one's going to want to gather together and fight the landowner or the white man because they have white friends and they're going to they're just going to make your life miserable. So it's crazy. It's all crazy. And it's still going on today, very much so.
Right, right, right. Someone says most Black people were happy to have their basic needs met in order to simply live. Okay, okay. Yeah, the mindset, as you stated, Erica, it's got to be like all like that in your head, because you want to make wealth, but you can't make wealth, but you want to do this, but so it's, and how do you, and then what if they turn on you, and because you can't trust, who can you trust and how far can you trust them in it? So it really becomes a frightening thing. And yes, you're set up for failure, and trust for many white people also. Yeah. I must say there was a time when people had things and they were taken, right? Legally taken. And we need to look at this and understand that it can happen, that this has already happened in our past, and it can happen again with different laws that are created. And we should be aware.
They're doing that now with when redlining districts, that's the only place where Blacks could buy a home or property. That's still going on today.
It's still going on today. Exactly. All of it is. But they're trying to not let us see it, right? No one's like doing it so that we can have an understanding of what really happened, so that we can really make educated and decisions, things that we on where we're going to go forward. I mean, this right here, the war on drugs just blew my mind. The fact that the government did this. Do you know how many families were destroyed with crack? That, I mean, and it was for what, like 10 years or something. It was a long period of time that our government fed this poison into our neighborhoods. And then we are still dealing with the aftermath of that right now.
Do you think that they believe that in order for them to make that money, they saw these neighborhoods as being disposable? What do they call it? Collateral damage, as long as they made their money.
Yes, and they were building power because the 60s civil rights had happened. Blacks were coming into more power. They were building more wealth, and going into the neighborhoods and doing that literally destroyed the structure. So it destroyed the family structures. It destroyed the community. It obliterated it in some areas, making them go back in time. Families were reverted, not grown during this period of time.
So
Especially with
in a sense, achieving two goals, disseminating the progress of the African American population within the cities, and getting money, because so you got, they got two benefits out of it.
Yeah.
More than two benefits. they're putting them in, they're going to prison. So they're making money on them in prison. The families are left without an income maybe. So now they're on welfare. You got CPS involved, constant.
And it all started with poverty because they needed work. And we see that jobs are not as available for African Americans. So especially Black men. I do a whole presentation on the Black man and their identity, which tends to be in our community very low. So when you're looking at, and hostile, we look at our Black men as hostile and low. So when you're looking at this generational poverty and how this has been set up, now let's get into it. Generational poverty, the definition is 30 years, 60 years. 30 years, say if your mom was poor for 30 years and then you are an adult and you've been poor for 30 years, you are in generational poverty. 60 years of poverty. Now, that we know that there are families that have been in many more generations of poverty than just one. So let's go into that. Let's think about it on the other side. As we're looking at generational poverty, there is something called generational wealth, right? So I want us to look at kind of both sides, the poverty and the wealth. On the poverty side, when a person passes in a family with poverty, they inherit debt, right? We see people in the intersections in the streets with signs saying, please help me bury my loved one, because they are in poverty. They have nothing and they've been given more debt. But if you look at generational wealth, when someone dies on that side, they gain wealth, right? There tends to be wealth gaining. So people trapped in generational poverty often lack financial education, different kind of educations that they need. They lack resources to gain that financial education. And they also lack sometimes the hope. Oh, I'm never gonna get, they live in what is considered a poverty mindset. So let's break this down. Slavery period was from 1619 to 1865. That's 246 years or 5.76 generations. The Black codes that went into Jim Crow laws lasted for 99 years or 1.65 generations. With those together, that's 7.5 generations of poverty that most African Americans have experienced. Now, affirmative action did come in 1964. And when it came, it was supposed to kind of equal us out by allowing us to have jobs and getting to education. But we know that all through those years, it was diced apart. And by 2023, it was ended completely. So affirmative action doesn't even exist anymore. But look, they didn't even give it a generation. Now, I don't know if this is something that they planned on or not, but if you think of math and you think that there's a middle, if you have 60 years in the hole and then you have 60 years above, you're at zero, right? You haven't gained anything. So if we want to look at our wealth situation as African Americans or minorities, we're literally starting at zero. There's literally not been 60 years when we have been able to openly create wealth. We've been suppressed the whole time. So we've only had 59 years. And I don't know if that's a joke, again, or if they knew, they don't want it to pivot to the plus side. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think it's all methodical. After the race riot that you shared with us earlier, and how they created a business area specific to the recently freed, right? If you think about it, for example, the barber, he was working in the white community, making quite a bit of money. Well, after the riot, when you're designated to a specific area amongst your community, so the recently freed slaves, they don't have money. And do you think the white man is going to come into that community and get a haircut? So I feel like it's methodical. Even with the 40 acres of land and the mule story, it's all planned out before it's provided.
I'm kind of feeling that way. Someone said, wait, most Black people were happy to in order to live. True for many white people also, very true. It is important to stay informed and to stay involved, know what's going on at all times. And our government also used drugs to control gangs from Latin America and started sending the gang members back to El Salvador and Honduras, which has made lawless those societies. Wow, I didn't know that, Laura. Thank you. It's very infuriating. I had never seen this laid out so clearly. Thank you. Some people will always see the progress of others as a threat to them. Very true, very true. So with this generational poverty thing here, it really just blew my mind looking at the time frames. 7.5 generations. You guys, we're working with these people, right? Those of us that are in mental health fields, that are working with social services, we're working with people that are 7.5 generations. And how are we supporting them, and how are we dealing with that mindset? I wanted to throw the other side on here. This is a messy slide, but it's more to talk through. And it's like 60 years of wealth. 60 years of wealth is generational wealth. So my mom had 30 years, I had 30 years, we're doing fine. We're in generational wealth. But if we look at those timelines, we're actually talking about 6.5 to 7 generations that I'm going to say our Caucasian counterparts. I know there are so many different stories and different situations, but just generally that they have had to build wealth in this country. The one slide that we saw when they said that the Reconstruction period was also the industrialization period, the time of industry, a lot of money was made during that time, but it was not allowed, for a whole group of people. So those 7 generations of wealth building were without limit. They were without challenge, and they were huge, we would have to say. So let's discuss the financial mindset of a person in generational poverty. And let's discuss the poverty mindset. Do you guys know what a poverty mindset is? Can I get someone to tell us what that is?
Budgeting.
Yeah.
Budgeting, government assistance, living paycheck to paycheck.
Those are
accepting that that is the way it is. The
I was
poverty
gonna say
mindset
that.
is.
Yeah, agreed. It comes down to acceptance. It comes down to this way of thought that says, I can't get anywhere.
And they don't have any role models around them because they're all in the same situation on that block, let's say.
Or most, at least. Yeah.
And so let's think of a mindset of a person and generationally. My great grandfather was on the plantation, and he was able to be a house slave, and maybe he was the son of the master, and the master gave him a ring, or maybe he was able to wear nicer clothes than those that were in the field. So then when you see someone in the field and you're looking at your peers, you're looking at what can you have to show you're better, show your wealth, to show you've done something. And it tended to be, because they had nothing else, what they wore. So when you see people with the big necklaces, right? People wearing, everybody's got to have a Coach purse, all of these things, it's wearing your wealth. And it's literally a poverty mindset. And in the fact that it's showing those, your peers, that you you succeeded a little more than them. And it comes from a mindset where you could have nothing else, right? So you see people with big cars. I'm showing my car, and I'm not, I'm not trying to say that all of these are, that people just do it for a poverty mindset. I'm just saying, think of that person in poverty that's got the big car, but they don't have a home, right? That's wearing their wealth because they want to be seen as successful in a structure where they tend to not be successful. I don't know, did I say that clearly?
Yeah, absolutely, because in order for them to have some kind of self-respect for themselves, they don't have anything, and they do know that. So when they go out, they have to present themselves as having more than they have. So they may have one suit, but they got 4 shirts, so that suit always looks different.
Right. And well, that's economy right there. Now, having the suit and having the shirts and stuff but say that it's a Louis Vuitton suit and you work at Jack in the Box, right? Let's say it's not that you can accumulate things and you have good things that you want to wear, but it's being outside of your financial position, I guess. I'm wanting some input on this. So let me see. I have someone saying, believing that financial improvement is out of reach, they feel powerless to change their circumstances, trying to demonstrate some level of pride and success. Right. So you see, I mean, all the time that people that are in, lower economic situations have a lot of gold, right? Or they're wearing designer purses or clothes or this or that, where you would think, well, why are they wasting their money on that? When they should be, those who think that they might have money or have arrived, are trying to decide why these people should live the way that they do. But what will you do to make change is one of the other things, and I'm going to come back to that because I think I want to go a little further. We do have time. So today, what I want to say is that 14 African Americans make up 14.2% of the population. And this was as of 2020, I believe that I got this statistic. I'm sorry, I usually put my site. But they're showing that only 2.3% of African Americans have, employ people or working. So we're underrepresented, right, in industry. Black businesses rarely get funding. We rarely, I mean, I have not received funding from a bank ever, and I've been in a business for 14 years. So we rarely receive funding, and our startups, we usually pay for it ourselves. So it's something that it's something that's a burden usually to our families, not a bonus. So opening up a business can be something that's very strapping for the family. Sadly, with generational poverty comes generational ignorance. That's true. Also, I want to say that home ownership, I'm sorry, the slide, I tried to get a better thing from the, I think this is the CDC, but it didn't work out. But if you look at this, home ownership, if you look at the top, you see 73.1, and that's for white, it's not going to let me, that's for white homeowners, and white alone, non-Hispanic homeowners, 73% of the population in 2020 owned homes. But if you see right under that, Black and African American, 7.9%. On the flip side of that are renters. So we see that 18% of the African Americans are renters. But it should, if you look at the Caucasian and white, you see on the flip of that, 50% are renters. So you have more homeowners than you have renters in a Caucasian class. But if you look at any of the other classes, you find that you have more renters than owners in any other racial breakdown that we have here. So what we're seeing is that it worked. Most Caucasian people are doing much better than most minority people. And what that called into was reparations, and reparations is still out there. They're still trying to fight for it in California. And people are like, why reparations? Why? But I think I might have laid out for you the reasoning for reparations, which is there was really no chance for many African Americans in our history to achieve. And during the times that we were achieving, even in the industrial time, we find that we were repressed and only Caucasians were able to play in that market and to make the money. So I don't want to go into we could talk about how to create wealth independently, but a lot of it has to do with systems, right? So I just want to go back to this slide. And what will you do for change? And if I'd love to have some comments on this. This is the first time I've done this type of presentation where I really wanted to pull these ideas out for you. So if we could have comment on what you are going to do and what you think of the information that you've gotten, I'd love to do that. Would anyone like to talk?
I have just been thinking a lot about like my family and like my background. I'm the first generation to be born and raised in the United States. So growing up, I didn't know like about a social security number, my credit score, all of that. And then just seeing my family like struggle trying to be something in this country, and just getting pushed back all the time, or like having to jump so many hurdles. Like it's a lot. So just thinking like about like how do you know the questions that you were asking, what do you think their mindset was? It just kind of reminded me of like our mindset now. It's like we want to succeed here, we want to do something, but it's so hard, they make it impossible. And for me, I think what would I do different? Because I also, we were poor growing up. Like, we would just play outside with sticks and, like rocks, climbing trees, all of that. Like, we didn't have Barbies like my next door neighbors and stuff. We were always renting, moving from place to place. And so when I got older and I had a place of my own, I was renting, but I was buying like expensive things, to kind of be like, hey, like I make money too. But now um I'm about to be 35, and just going through this training and listening to everything, I'm like, oh my goodness, if I do have kids, what can I like give to them or leave for them? So now I'm like, okay, maybe I should start looking into stocks and doing more research and finding out more about wealth, because I don't know much about that, and just educating myself more.
I love it. Thank you, Alexandra. And that's exactly it. How do we use our wealth? Okay, I'm gonna say some vote, vote, vote. I'm with you. Vote.
Hey, Shore, this is Roger.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, this has been a very good presentation. I got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. Comments, this is not just a white man problem, it's a human problem. The idea of power and enslaving people. I mean, we see that in India with the caste system, and in Africa, the Russians and Southern Europeans were enslaved in Africa. And even in Africa, it was Africans that were selling their fellow citizens, to the white traders. We see this kind of slavery in the Middle East today with Thai workers and Filipino workers in Arab countries. So it's a sin problem. It's a human problem that we all deal with. I liked what Erica said about hope. We have to be people of hope, and we've certainly seen some of that hope in our own country with with Lincoln's second inaugural address, we shouldn't be earning, our wealth from the sweat of another man's brow, that kind of stuff. And, William Wilberforce in England, basically ended the slave trade. And of course, Dr. King and all that he did in the 60s, there's tremendous hope. So one of my questions, before you can really answer what do you do to make a change, one of the things that was thrown out there is that these systems are still in place that are oppressing people. And I'm trying to figure out what those systems are. One thing I heard was Black people of color are not able to get business loans as easily as white people. That's certainly a system that's in place. Are there other things, and that's something that would need to change. That's not fair, that's not just. But help me with some of the other systems that you see that are in place that are oppressing people.
The judicial system oppresses people by it's been traditionally putting more minorities in jail for longer periods of time. Credit scores is what someone said here, something about credit scores.
School systems.
The school system, yeah.
Housing, we get, can you hear me? Sorry, my other.
Go for it, Laura.
Isn't working. So credit, not just credit, but also housing, in the sense that we give mortgage credit on our income tax every year. There's no credit for renters. They don't have the same kind of renter credit that you get as if you have a mortgage. That's a huge, huge thing. And it's across the board, because people who own homes get these huge credits on their income tax that no renters get. And renting in general, the power is with the landlord, and this is seen over and over and over again. I work in eviction prevention, and this is a huge systemic problem that affects all low-income people in our country, mostly around the world too. But that's a huge system that's hard. And that comment about redlining is so true. They've actually gone back and compared redlining maps of the United States from when they first started doing the CRA and making banks give people money to build an outside of those, and those maps have not changed since the 60s. They have not changed one bit all over the country.
So help me here. How is the school system, for example, a systemic problem?
I think that one is really, none of these problems are really, one white person in the back saying, oh yeah, we need to suppress the Black people. But I think the racism as it's ingrained as we grew up as white folks, as we see minorities, as we express our prejudices and undiscovered biases in the classroom, as we're learning from our teachers when we become teachers how to treat behaviors, how to be setting consequences for cheating on a test. It is still, the expulsion rate for African American male students is still through the roof when compared to expulsion of similar offenses with white male students and things like that. So the systemic racism within our school system starts with every individual teacher looking at themselves and their teaching practices, and then at the school district level, what should be our consequences for these and these offenses, and really becoming aware. And I think that is really where the crux lies, is yes, these are systemic problems, but every system is made out of individuals. And once we start looking at our biases, and yes, I was harsher on this kid because he was Black and I wasn't aware of it, and really digging deep into our own prejudice and our own bias, that is where all of this can be eventually hopefully resolved. But that is from my school experience and from my teaching experience, where most of the inequities within the classroom lie, is within personal bias within teachers. there's been a huge study on this. If I remember, it just came out a year or two ago, where the black boy punishment versus white boy punishment expulsion rate was so heavily where this was laid very obvious and very clearly.
Now, my understanding of redlining is that Black people are not allowed to go into certain areas and buy houses. Is that, but I'm wondering, are there laws on the books that actually say that, or is it just attitudes that people need to adjust? I mean,
Well, Roger, to my
yeah.
understanding, sorry, but I think it had more to do with the banks who were writing the loans.
Absolutely.
And the banks had guidelines that if it was an African American customer, these were areas that they would not allow them, or they would not, cut the check if that's where they were trying to purchase a home.
Okay.
Is that correct as far as you know, Shore?
Yes, it was with the banks, and they put higher loans to African Americans with higher interest rates for the same home that they would have given to the counterpart. So it's always been, even in renting, they rent higher rents to more minorities than other areas. So there were quite a few comments on this. So add financial literacy to the school's curriculum in order to increase the community's knowledge about it. Make sure to educate my children on how to succeed, to guide them in the right direction so they can exceed. My husband and me building my own financial wealth and assets so that I can give my children a better start in life once they leave the nest. One thing I want you guys to know is, like, all Black people need to understand, if you are not in poverty, you are ahead of the game. All minorities, you're ahead of the game with this 60-year thing. So if you haven't gotten 60 years of wealth under your belt where you can say, yeah, my family did this and I did this, but you're doing well, you're not in debt, you're not on aid, then you're basically a bit ahead of the game. And I only say that to say, many of us are like, man, I'm working so hard and I'm not getting anywhere, but I want you to know that you're really succeeding and doing well beyond what was expected. So another comment is, yes, teach them what we weren't taught, so they hopefully make better financial decisions and better life for them and their loved ones. One of the things that I want to really say is credit scores, school to prison pipeline. Roger, I think these are policing of our communities. It's structural. Show compassion and present opportunities to others. If you have means to help another, do so. Notice self-greed and break away from it. Kindness is a different kind of wealth and can carry another a long way. Try to understand opposing views. Don't be cruel. Amen. To anyone or anything. Always have an open mind to learn the ways of others and the world. The more aware you are, will affect those around you. Structural infrastructure that favors the white majority. The permits given to smoke shops, marijuana shops, liquor stores, and low-income communities, but they're not, they're not in La Jolla, right? Oh, and infrastructure. If you go to San Diego and to Southeast San Diego and you look at the neighborhoods, they are ugly. There's no real vegetation. They're dirt lots. They're all, the freeways are moving through the neighborhood, not on the outside of the neighborhood. And they are food deserts. So there are different things happening in different communities still today. With this presentation, what I wanted to do was really just bring an awareness and for us to try to understand a little better what generational poverty actually means and where we see it in our systems so that we can start voting. Remember, right now, Prop 6 is on the ballot, and there's another prop that's on the ballot that's dealing with incarceration. So we really need to start looking at, number one, being involved, voting. Everyone must vote. And then look at these propositions and these things that they're
There's
doing.
one for schools too, because our schools are falling apart.
And wasn't it supposed to be the lottery that paid for the schools?
Exactly. Where's that money? That was all that money was supposed to be going to schools, and our schools are falling apart, and our kids are drinking lead water, and it's ridiculous.
Right. So please vote, be a part of it, run for office, make your voices heard. I'm going to call these last three things out. Does anyone want to say anything? Anybody else want to?
Thank you.
I want to make one comment, sure, about we talk about systemic and we talk about internal biases, and I think they're both important. But I think for a long time we used the internal bias like you're racist or whatever, and then we didn't do anything about the systemic, and we thought it was all like we just go and pray about it and it'll get better. And I just think it's really important to be aware that the systemic one is the structural one. There's so many examples in history where when you change the system and you change the structure, people come around because they have to. So if you wait to feel better or for people to be less biased, it's not going to happen.
It's not. We really have to educate people. Katie, do you want to talk about your comment? It feels weird reading all of these. Katie, do you want to say that?
The school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, what are you saying of her preschool? What are you saying?
Oh, yeah, so I used to be a preschool teacher in a few different preschools, and I experienced teachers that would, definitely treat the children of color, specifically Black children, specifically the boys, a lot more harshly than like, the white boys that would have the same kinds of, behaviors in classrooms, and they would, speak not as nicely, or they just treated them differently. I'm like, these are 2, 3, 4-year-olds. Like, how are you, this is a preschool. Why are these children having to experience that from these teachers?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's systemic, and we really do need to work on, again, what y'all guys said, our bias, and reopen our minds to examine and look at others. Here it says in not just Blacks, but Latinos as well. If we look at Lemon Grove back in the day for renting and buying options, I lived in Lemon Grove, and I won't tell you the year, but yeah, exactly. We used to get bussed in to Helix. I used to get bussed into Helix High. So that. Roger, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Audiobook is great, is what Jane said. The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein.
Yes, if nobody has read that book, it is excellent. It talks about redlining. It talks about where we've come with our housing and the history of housing through the years, even from African Americans trying to purchase homes in Northern California up in and from the bases, and how only a percentage of African Americans could purchase in a particular area. It goes from the beginning to the end, and it's it's not a one-sided, definitely not a one-sided read or listen. It really gives the history from the government perspective, and the Fannie Mae and all of those laws that were put into place with the government regulations. It's really good. You can listen to it. You don't even have to read it. Just pop it in your car on your way wherever you go. It's a really good listen.
Thank you. And then it says medical care has a history of systemic racism. And look at infant deaths today. Even today, that Black infant death rate, mortality rate is huge, and the women, the mothers are dying at astronomical rates. And that has to do with how we're treated in hospitals. And I know many Black women have their own story of how they were treated, when they were giving birth. Or Daniela?
It's so funny that you're talking about treatment. And then Roger had mentioned that, this is a human problem. So I happened to have the privilege last Saturday to experience a presentation by this woman named Adriana Hasso, who works for American Friends Society or Social Committee. So she does, she's a human advocate and does a lot of border work. And so she was sharing with us the issue down at the border and showed us videos and pictures in this area called Whiskey 8, which you should look into it. And just kind of the treatment that is given to a lot of the folks that are coming here for asylum and refugee status. And what really impacted me was just the treatment towards the children. Very, very young kids, you know, being asked to take off their shoelaces from their shoes because they can't have the shoelaces, and then just only being able to have one layer of clothing. And, you know, the experience, we're talking about experience and treatment, and those are experiences that, you know, people will always remember. And it goes back to, you start to believe how you're being treated, or maybe that is who I am a criminal, you know? And so I just think if we can provide better experiences, whatever the reason is that they're coming here, it's just, hey, let's just be human and be kind and treat people with compassion and empathy versus, you know, judgment.
Traumatizing people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
that's
was all.
real. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to say? Someone says history being taught in schools are very misleading. A lot of vital history is not being taught. This critical race theory, they think that every time we talk about history, we're talking about critical race theory. That kind of blows me away. Yes, and the first account biographies and books coming from people of color are banned. Yeah, they're banning books at the schools. Can you expand on your opinion for Prop 6? Prop 6. Prop 6 is saying that they can no longer profit off of the labor of the prisoners. That's a no-brainer for me. I think that they should never, I think it's a form of slavery that still exists today. And it's one of the reasons that they created privatized prisons so that the corporations could use the cheap labor. This all goes back, and you guys can think I'm crazy or it's a conspiracy, but our landowners are still the landowners and they own the corporations. So the corporations, if you think about it today, you can't do anything. The corporation tells you everything. You can't return anything unless it's under their regulations. You can't do anything really without the corporation saying that it's okay that you can do it. So with Prop 6, I'm saying that a lot of corporations are still making money off of free labor or very close to free labor, and that it should not be. That there should be no, it should be, they should be in jail being, what is it? Fixed. I'm sorry, the word's not coming to me, but they should be rehabilitated. Rehabilitated.
Yes.
This is more of a punitive system. So I think that we should take our penal system to being rehabilitative and not so punitive. And I think that if we stopped letting them get paid off of our people, there wouldn't be so many people going to jail.
Also, I'm sure, isn't it true that the police are based on the original slave patrols?
They are the slave patrol. Now, I did a whole training on all of that. So the slave owners became the slave overseers, became the slave patrol, which became the police department. And they have always been here to ensure that brown and black people did what they were supposed to do. The people that hire police are the landowners and the corporations, and that is who the police work for. That's why they don't even show up until something has happened, right? They're not there to prevent anything. They're only there to enforce the law when something has happened. So police are, they are part of the structure of the system. And when you look at how they treat our men and our women and our boys and our girls when they are put into the system, they are traumatized. The school to prison pipeline is a very traumatizing event for our youth. And I don't know why anyone would think that the youth are going to come out of there better than they went in. I do
Because
have
they
a,
want them to come out. They want them to come out worse so they can incarcerate them again. Yeah.
okay. Are there any books? Does anyone have any suggestions on getting involved in stocks? So what I do is I have oh Lord, what is it? I have a stash account. Stash is online trading. I think it's like mutual funds, and I have money going into it every month. And then I can play with it and move and buy this stock or buy that stock. And I buy stocks that I use, like Starbucks or things that I'm actually consuming myself. So that might be some ideals for getting involved in stock. Try one of those. They have them on your phone. Try one of those and put a little money in there and play with the market.
Can you put it
Does
on the
anyone else?
chat?
Huh?
Can you put that on the chat?
Stash. Okay.
Thank you.
I just recently found out from our company organizational stock investor person for the 401k that they don't no longer use the term ESG because there are no mutual funds that don't include some kind of support of weapons, fossil fuels, or tobacco. They just don't, because the corporations are so big now that if you do like semiconductor or you support some kind of techno, it's all supporting weapons, it's all supporting fossil fuels. So that's something I learned this week.
Right. You've got to really look at it. And again, the corporations are so big. So what we need to, as people, be doing is looking at how do we change that? How do we get more control over our lives, right? How do we get involved so that we can make change? Because if we're not involved, there is no change. We have to vote, number one, and then we have to run for office so that our ideas are the ones that are put into our society. Someone says, I created an account with Edward Jones. I don't pay enough attention to stock market trends. So to me, I found it easier to have someone else do it for me. Robinhood account is what I have to buy stocks. So there's a Robinhood. I do as well, but I want to grasp an understanding of what to look for. Yeah, I buy for a period of time and look at it. There are a lot of books and everything. Danette says, she put a link in there and says, George Thompson also speaks on building generational wealth, especially for people of color. So Danette, you might want to check that out from her. So I am really excited that you guys like this topic. It's a topic that I've really wanted to bring out and try to get people to have a better understanding. I am basically done. So if you guys have any comments or anything you want to say at this time, do you think I should do it again? Is there anything I should do different? Should I add anything? Or do you think that this was because I'm hoping to do this again, but so do you think that this was good?
Sure. I'm going to send out a survey so that people can give you feedback and also find out what else you guys want to hear presentations on so we can do more of this. And one other thing I wanted to say is if you enjoyed today, join our racial justice group. We meet once a month and we just have all sorts of amazing conversations just like this. So what I'm going to do is after this, I'm going to send out the link so you can have a copy of this this great webinar so you can share it with people, and also send you the link to our next racial justice meeting. And it's an hour. We usually meet on a Thursday. I don't have the November date quite yet, but we hope you can all join us for that and have more conversations. So I think Celine.
I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you. I really enjoy this topic, and I think that just spreading our knowledge and spreading kindness like goes a long way. I really enjoyed this topic, and I think that spreading it not only with our peers but maybe with our family, that would go a long way. You never know, like what impact you can have on somebody and what difference you can make. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, and I appreciate this this group. I really liked it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent. One last thing I'll say is look at your traditions, you guys. Look at your family traditions. There are a lot of things that, like right now, they just had they just had a prom, not a prom, but they have these things that go on at school and all of these events. When you're looking at spending a lot of money, quinceañeras, different things like that, might want to think about doing a college fund instead of buying that outfit, right? Or splurging all that money to send your kid to go do something for something that's not actually an achievement. Maybe, get them a little stock and help them play with the stock market. So maybe we should be looking differently at how we're celebrating our traditions with our youth and teach them how to build wealth. Yes, Laura.
I thought it was a great show. I really liked the overview. It's fantastic the way you put everything together. Really interesting. And I was thinking that if you wanted to add anything, something that is hard to know about if you don't have kids in school right now, is the misinformation that's happening in our educational system. That'd be really interesting to include something about what is being told and currently that is just not true, historically especially. Just because I learned so many bad things when I was growing up, and I know that some of that's still going on. So I would be interested in something like that, just because I don't know how to find that out, that maybe involving teachers or something, somehow you could figure it out. I don't know. That's a suggestion, but it was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Adela said that the government opens a college account and deposits $500 for each student. It's parents to continue adding to. Oh, so you guys might want to look into that if you've got some kids that are getting ready to, not getting ready, but college funds start when they're babies. So I want to thank you so very much for your time, and I'm going to give you the rest of your time back. So thank you, Marilyn, and I hope to speak with you guys and see you out.
Thank you so much, Shore. That was amazing. We really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will be sending out some more information to you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.